At your attention, exploring medicalization and de-medicalization in ADHD. In this presentation, we will examine the concept of medicalization and how it relates to certain human conditions and behaviors. We will also then discuss de-medicalization and the way these conditions or behaviors can come full circle and leave the medical institution. We will focus on the condition ADHD, attention deficit disorder with hyperactivity, which for many years has been a primary example of a condition that many claim is a social form of medicalization. Also, we will profile Dr. Peter Conrad, who is a leading social scientist that has devoted much of his career focusing on the social aspects of medicalization and with a focus as how it pertains to ADHD. Medicalization. What is it? Medicalization can be defined as the process where a problem that is non-medical becomes redefined and treated as a medical problem in terms of an illness or disorder. So, it's when a problem is defined in medical terms or describing a solution to a problem as a medical intervention used to treat the problem. It can be a broad concept as it may not always be related to physicians and their treatment, but can also relate to different cultures or subcultures and their willingness to accept or reject a problem as a medical condition. Examples can be alcoholism and addiction as a common example as a troublesome behavior that lends itself as a medical condition in order to treat the situation. Also, giving birth and pregnancy was once an activity that was intimately held in the home or the house with a midwife involved that eventually gave way to be handed over to the confines of hospitals and medical professionals. Overeating and undereating disorders, once believed to be the product of one's self-control, are now viewed as a medical problem that can be rectified by the use of medicine or diagnosed by a doctor. None of this is to reject the effectiveness of medical intervention, but to highlight that these problems were at one time considered just social issues and then eventually constructed and guided into the process of medicalization. The ADHD journey begins in the 1940s when practitioners observed students having hyperactivity, inattention, and disorganization and concluded that it could be as a result of brain dysfunction. For the next 2 decades, scientists linked this behavior to possible brain injuries, but by 1961, Ritalin was first prescribed to treat these behavior problems in children. By 1970, skepticism began to grow about the medicalization of hyperactivity and worries that Ritalin was being overprescribed in children. By 1980, the American Psychiatric Association officially defined the disorder as attention deficit disorder, or ADD, and later expanded it to simply ADHD by 1987. Stimulants prescribed in children went up fourfold from 1987 to 1996, and still some educators believed it was being overdiagnosed and used as an excuse for poor behavior and impulsiveness in students. By the mid-90s, doctors began even diagnosing adults with adult ADHD, then expanding it from what was first considered a disorder only with children, further medicalizing behavior problems to be treated with stimulants. Over the next decades to the present, ADHD is frequently diagnosed to children and adults, with many scientists still debating that is a form of biological dysfunction or simply a medicalization of typical deviance promoted by pharmaceutical companies to sell drugs. Here we have Dr. Peter Conrad, looking pretty cool in his Red Sox hat, standing by a mountain there. Conrad works in the Department of Sociology at Brandeis University and has focused much of his work on the medicalization of deviance, ADHD, and the globalization of ADHD. In 1981, he received the Charles Horton Cooley Award from the Society for the Study of Symbolic Interaction. served as the chair of Medical Sociology section of the American Sociological Association from 1989 to 1990, and has written several books on the subject, including Deviance and Medicalization in 1992, The Medicalization of Society in 2007, and Global Perspectives on ADHD in 2017. Conrad explores the different social causes of medicalization. He points to the growing secularization of Western societies as one of those factors. When in the late 19th century, Western societies went through the Age of Enlightenment and into the more individualized industrial age, many behaviors that were once considered sins went through this process of sin to crime to condition. So where you once asked for forgiveness from God, you now ask society for a medical cure. Conrad also examines the rise of the medical profession as a factor in the cause of medicalization, even referring to it as medical imperialism. The profession has grown into an institution of control that is able to define what health is and what is illness, with it now being the authority on what becomes medicalized. These are all forms of social control, which is a central theme in sociology. Though societies pride themselves on individualism, these institutions are formed through interaction and through social forces create an environment where reality is shaped by their control. Conrad explains a three-step process of medicalization where first, a broad cultural problem is recognized as problematic in society. Then second, there's a medical discovery that gains a growing interest in the medical community. And then third, when the biomedicalization of this behavior can overtake non-medical causes, it has gone through the process and is fully medicalized. Some points Conrad has made about ADHD include the tendency for adults to self-diagnose themselves with ADHD by reading about the disorder and thinking, this is me, or sometimes it comes as a result where their kid is diagnosed and they feel they were the same way as a kid and still are. Conrad even recognizes the irony where there's more skepticism published about ADHD even results in more self-diagnosis based on the publicity of the disorder. He points out the medicalization of underperformance, where people reevaluate their past behavior and now have a medical scapegoat as the cause, with the idea that these designer drugs can improve the performance of anyone who takes them. Another factor that promoted the medicalization of ADHD is that it comes in the form of a new disability that one can attain to acquire benefits from. Conrad stated that under the American Disabilities Act, individuals with ADHD are entitled to reasonable accommodations if their disorder is sufficiently severe to interfere with tasks that they are otherwise qualified to perform. Conrad describes medical expansion, where the popular acceptance of the illness by professionals, the media, and claim makers creates a feedback loop, expanding the application of the disorder. He compares this to alcoholism, where it was promoted by Alcoholics Anonymous as a medical condition and then subsequently expanded to include the adult children of alcoholics, enablers, and codependency. Shifting gears a little, let's take a look at de-medicalization. De-medicalization is defined as the transformation of problems formerly understood to be medical in nature into problems understood to be non-medical. One common example is homosexuality, that was once considered a deviant mental condition, is now a part of accepted life and is an everyday part of Western societies. The treatment of mental health in state hospitals that were previously referred to as insane asylums is an interesting case of demedicalization. After scrutiny over inhumane treatment, these places mostly were shut down and controversially left many people unhoused without the ability to receive better care. A situation like this leaves physicians with the responsibility to explore better outcomes when demedicalization occurs. There are some that advocate for the demedicalization of ADHD. Some argue that evidence for the diagnosis of ADHD is overly contentious and believe there is not substantial enough evidence that ADHD exists as a discrete disorder or condition. Some consider the source of the diagnosis and point out that because it is commonly diagnosed in Western societies, that the source can be linked to the environment in which childhood and behaviors are viewed. You also find claims challenging the efficacy and safety of the treatment that considers the harm stimulants may have on developing brains. Other interpretations involve that behavior in children and behaviors are the result of a distressed environment, but not necessarily medically or psychiatrically ill. That concludes our presentation. Again, we took a look at the medicalization of social problems, highlighted ADHD, took a look at Dr. Peter Conrad and his concepts of medicalization and his work involving ADHD, and then took a quick look at ideas in demedicalizing ADHD. Thank you very much.